What is up, ladies and gentlemen? You know it is a special edition when I am coming to you live during the middle of the day, right here with another episode of Woo Fantasy, right here on Rotoballer.com as usual. Rotoballer.com, your one-stop shop for all things fantasy. Whatever sport you need to jump into, we've got you covered over there at rotoballer.com. So go sign up today for the premium package, get you covered nonstop, whether that is NBA playoffs right now, NHL playoffs, MLB, DFS, we've got you covered right now, and then PGA, we've got the PGA Championship coming up next week. So go over there and get signed up for that. Rotoballer.com, promo code WOO, get you an additional discount at checkout. So go grab that today. Also brought to you by Underdog, promo code WOO at Underdog as well. We've got Best Ball Mania going on right now. Go and draft you a team, Best Ball Mania at Underdog, and that is promo code WOO as well. So go and check it out. My goodness, what are we doing here, you might ask? It is 1:30 Central Time on a Tuesday afternoon. Why in God's name is Brandon the Roto Superstar on here doing a podcast in the middle of the day? Well, I'm off this week, ladies and gentlemen. I figured I would bring you a little bit of some fantasy goodness, and we will talk some fantasy today for you. So if you've got questions, bring them into me, shoot them into the comment section, and we will get you taken care of. Don't forget to click that like and subscribe. Give me a thumbs up on this as well, because obviously that's going to help us out. But we're here today. We're going to talk a little bit of some fantasy football, some of the news and notes from around the league. Going to jump in and talk a little bit rookie ADP as well. That a lot of the rookie drafts have started up post NFL draft over the course of the last week. Over on, I'm going to use Sleeper as our means to look at the ADP for rookie drafts as things currently stand right now. So we'll get to that a little bit later on, but what do you guys want to talk about? That's the kind of the thing we want to really jump into. If I want to steal a line from Cody Rhodes, the American Nightmare himself, what we want to look at today, obviously, news and notes, going and looking at it, really a domino that has fallen within the last hour has been the what I called on Twitter. If you follow me on there, is and saw what I posted as soon as the signing was made, the inevitable signing of Tyler Boyd to the Tennessee Titans. He now follows Brian Callahan to Nashville, going to fill that much needed slot receiver role for the Tennessee Titans in this offense. So you might ask yourself, does this move the needle whatsoever for fantasy? No, obviously, the answer is going to be no. If you're going to look at it from a fantasy perspective, this is going to be a signing that's going to be more to help the team as a whole learn the offense that Brian Callahan is going to bring in. To bring a guy like a Calvin Ridley up to speed with the offense is what Tyler Boyd is really going to be there for. That's kind of the main factor what we're going to be looking at with this signing with the Tennessee Titans. Obviously, it's another weapon in this rotation for the Tennessee Titans. You're going to see the Titans are going to throw the ball more in 2024 than we've seen in the past with Derrick Henry back there in the backfield to take all the work for the team. Will Levis, we saw in bits and pieces last year. There's flashed potential. If you look right now, QB ADP of 24. So there's a chance that he could be a guy that's going to come up the board a little bit more as people really get into the summer, and maybe we see a little bit more out of this offense. There's a chance that he can really far out produce that ADP at 24 right now, more or less from a volume standpoint, if you want to look at it that way, because Will Levis is going to be throwing the ball a lot. This Tennessee Titans team, even though they have added bits and pieces here and there, they're still not going to be great on the defensive side of the ball. That means we're going to see situations where this team is going to be having to throw the ball to really kind of keep the pace with teams in that division, really more than anything, if you look at it, because C.J. Stroud, the Houston Texans, And then you also have Trevor Lawrence and the Jacksonville Jaguars. Those are going to be the kind of the two main rivals of this team moving forward, that they're going to really try to have to outproduce to kind of win those ball games. And that's going to be a good situation from a fantasy standpoint for a Will Levis. So that's something that I do like. If you're going to be looking at him as a kind of a low end QB2 or even in Superflex formats, a guy you want to grab as your QB3, Will Levis is a guy that I would probably kind of look at to try to bring into that roster, especially if you're drafting a QB kind of early. If you get a guy like a Joe Burrow type, a Lamar Jackson type earlier on in your drafts, you're doing them right now at Underdog Fantasy. So you got a guy like Will Levis that you can get further back in the board, kind of like what we saw last year with Brock Purdy. I'm not saying that Will Levis is going to put up Brock Purdy numbers, but from a ADP and a value standpoint, last year Brock Purdy was a guy that was really going late in drafts. But if you were in the know and you really kind of follow things and know how Kyle Shanahan and that system really bred to quarterback production potential, Brock Purdy's a guy that you were getting really late in drafts, and it paid off for you as the year went along. And I think that's something on a smaller standpoint you're going to see with a Will Levis this year in 2024. He's a guy that you can get virtually free later in drafts. He's kind of a good fallback option for a potential injury that you might have come about to your starter. We saw it last year in 2023. The quarterback position took a lot of injuries in 2023. Hopefully it's not the same in 2024, but Will Levis could be a guy that you could kind of fall back on to really help you during trying times when you need those guys that are putting up volume, throwing the ball. He's got the weapons. We've talked about it ad nauseum at this point. Hopkins is on his last leg. Calvin Ridley there is going to be a situation that's going to help him with the signing of Tyler Boyd. Just another piece to the puzzle. You got Tony Pollard, you've got Tyjae Spears in that backfield. There's weapons around him. That offense is going to really kind of be honed into finding the open man, short, quick passes, somewhat similar to what we saw with Cincinnati, with Joe Burrow, with the Brian Callahan offense that he's going to be bringing in. So getting on the other side of that news, obviously the other domino that we're going to be looking at is going to be with Treylon Burks. You're already seeing it all over Twitter right now and all over X, is what does this do for Treylon Burks? I think it's pretty obvious at this point in time. Treylon Burks is probably out the door sooner rather than later. I would imagine that he gets cut from the team. Tennessee probably going to be looking to do the right thing to get him on the free agent market, allow him to kind of shop and go and find a new fresh start somewhere else. Because let's be honest, he's been banged up since he was drafted, just 2 years ago, after the A.J. Brown deal on that Thursday night of the NFL draft. Treylon Burks was already coming in with big shoes to fill. Everyone was upset and hurt over the A.J. Brown departure. He just could never live up to the billing. Only plays in 11 games each of the last 2 seasons. Just was never a factor in 2023. It felt like he was being phased out even this past year after the team brought in DeAndre Hopkins. And now I think he's going to be put in a position where he can really find footing somewhere else and kind of start over in another team with another team to try to revive the career, maybe try to get healthy and fit in with more of an offense that could be to fit his skill set, let's say, so to speak. So, I mean, there's plenty of options that could be out there for him. Obviously, if the price is right, from a contract standpoint, we've talked about it all offseason long. At least I have on Twitter. The Cowboys, they have played it cheap all offseason long with free agents and not bringing people in. That's somewhere I think Treylon Burks can kind of come in and sit. Obviously, there's that Arkansas connection with Jerry Jones. So that's going to be something to kind of watch out for. Okay, and Cowboys could kind of bring him in and maybe try to groom him up, somewhat of a similar situation with the trade with Trey Lance last year. Bringing him in, let him kind of sit, learn, get healthy, try to kind of get back to things. But outside of that, I mean, let's really look at where the potential landing spots could be for a Treylon Burks. I mean, you could put him in a situation where, gosh, you could put him down in Atlanta. That's a potential landing spot. You could honestly, he could be the third wheel, putting him up in Minnesota with the Vikings. In that potential rotation up there, back behind Justin Jefferson, obviously behind Jordan Addison. That's kind of another landing spot from the top of my head, just kind of thinking of where he could potentially go. Uh, Staying in the same division, he could go to the Indianapolis Colts. That could be another situation there too. I know they brought in Adonai Mitchell via the draft, and they do still have the pieces there with Josh Downs and obviously with the tight ends that they have on the roster. So just from that aspect, Treylon Burks going to be moving on somewhere. Remains to be seen where. So we'll kind of keep our eyes and ears open for potential reports to see where things might land when it comes to Treylon Burks. Now, although he has not been with the Cincinnati Bengals now for obviously this entire offseason, the question does remain: where is he going? What does this do for the Cincinnati Bengals and that rotation at wide receiver with the Bengals? Obviously, if you followed me for a while and kind of know, I've been a very big proponent of Jermaine Burton, who was drafted by the Cincinnati Bengals. I think this is going to be now a situation where, with the Bengals, this potentially puts Burton in that slot conversation with the team. Burton will have a chance really from the word go when training camp starts. You got rookie workouts are kind of underway as we speak, so he's got a good chance to get in there early, learn the language of the system, see what could be beneficial to him, what type of offensive packages that he could use. They could use Burton in. We know at this point in time the discourse between T. Higgins and the team over that potential new contract. So that's something that you're going to have to monitor as well, especially from a dynasty and a rookie standpoint when you're looking at drafts. And Jermaine Burton is a guy that could be talked about. Jermaine Burton, you're getting a guy that's further down the board in rookie rankings right now, rookie draft rankings especially, according to the ADP. You can get him, and he could potentially be as high as a wide receiver too with the Bengals moving forward in 2025 if they were to move on from T. Higgins. So that's something to kind of keep in mind as you look forward and try to project out what the role of Jermaine Burton would be on this offense. And then outside of that, I mean, you had those bits and pieces of flashes that we saw last year with Andre Yoshevich. He was a guy that performed rather well down the stretch, was a guy that I kind of liked, small school prospect coming in 2023. Once he got a little bit more usage and more routes on this offense later on down the stretch, down the year, he looked good at times. So that's something to kind of keep in mind as well. So I think that's going to be a battle for that wide receiver 3 spot in training camp to kind of see how things play out there. So that is kind of the fallout of what we are seeing from the Tyler Boyd signing as we stand right now. But outside of that, I know I kind of teased some things back a couple of weeks ago during the weekend of the NFL draft. So obviously, we'll go ahead and get into it now since I've not really had a chance to talk about it via podcast or anything. So put this out there for you guys. Potentially some other people might want to come and join in via the YouTube page. So let's put that out there and get everybody in and ready to join us. Like I said, if you got any questions whatsoever, don't be afraid to hit the comment section up, shoot them in to me. I will answer anything, whether you're doing best ball drafts right now, whether you're doing dynasty rookie drafts, or even you got keeper league, you got questions, whatever it may be, shoot them my way. Hit us up, #woo, send in your questions, and I will get to those as well. So let's get into it. Biggest elephant in the room as we are currently talking about fantasy news and notes. Ezekiel Elliott in landing spot with the Dallas Cowboys. As you all know, Big Cowboys fan here, have been all my life. Uh, and I have been very, very adamant about what I thought how this Cowboys offseason was going to play out. If you followed me on Twitter over the last few months, especially, you know I've kind of had my finger on the pulse. I followed this team enough that you can read the tea leaves and see how things were going to play out for this team over the course of the last few months. Uh, there's been that bait and switch that Jerry Jones and Stephen Jones has done with contract extensions, especially with Dak Prescott, because that's been the one that's been talked about the most. Do we extend Dak Prescott? Do we get into making him the highest paid quarterback in the league? And he even was asked that question a couple of weekends ago if he's looking to become the highest paid quarterback in the league. And you saw his response was, not necessarily. Well, I'm here to tell you that's bullshit. He does want to become the highest paid quarterback in the league. That's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. He wants to rely on those regular season performance numbers that we've seen. Yeah, his second MVP voting last year, obviously a regular season award, but wants to rely on what he's done during the regular season. And I've been his biggest, adversary. One of the ones on Twitter is that he just does not show up when the lights get the brightest. Whether you want to put the finger of blame on coaching staff, whether you want to put the finger of blame on, let's say, the defense during the Green Bay Packer loss in the playoffs, you can point to every other direction you want to. But simply put, Dak Prescott falters when it matters the most. We cannot, and I cannot stress this enough, you cannot extend this man and give him the highest paid quarterback money in the NFL for a guy that's not going to win you a championship. That's just simply put, because what you're doing is you're going to set yourself up for failure for the next few years just because of the restraints you're putting yourself under from a cap standpoint, because we've seen it all across the NFL over the last few years. A lot of these teams that are competing and advancing in NFL in playoff time and getting Super Bowls are guys that are going to be teams that have quarterbacks on rookie contracts that have that flexibility to be able to add pieces throughout the rest of the roster. And that's something that the Cowboys have just simply not been able to do. And we're seeing it on full display this offseason. Tony Pollard out the door. We're not going to extend him, not going to give him a contract. We've seen it with offensive linemen. Tyron Smith out the door. See you later. You're in New York with the Jets now. And they're simple situations where we could have just increased an amount by $1 million or $2 million here or there, but we're salary cap strapped. So now you're getting back to the point where initially what I wanted to kind of discuss is the Ezekiel Elliott signing. An absolute embarrassment of a signing. I know a lot of people in the fantasy community and a lot of people in the fantasy industry, some of my colleagues out there, they want to spin this from a positive standpoint. And there's simply no way to spin this from a positive standpoint. Going into the offseason, I put out a point-blank 1-2 plan of what I thought this entire offseason was going to look like from the running back position for the Dallas Cowboys. I put out immediately Tony Pollard would not be back. That happened. I put out immediately Rico Dowdle would be re-signed and brought back as the backup option, as more steady veteran presence in this backfield for the Dallas Cowboys. That is exactly what happened. Rico Dowdle brought back in. But then we do this asinine signing of Royce Freeman as a third running back, fourth running back, whatever you want to call it. Simply put, just dumb. And that's where we are going into the NFL draft. And then the rumblings start happening as we get into the draft. Jerry Jones is out after night one of the draft, says things to the point of going, the draft's not over yet. Let's see. I really am interested in seeing what this team looks like with Ezekiel Elliott at running back moving forward. And I lost it because at that point in time, you could read everything like a script in front of you. And then over the course of round 2, round 3, day 3, you saw everything playing out. We got to the end of round 3 on Friday night, and there was a chance there for the Dallas Cowboys to make what should have been the right move and that was to draft a running back with that second pick in round 3 to bring in, whether it had been Jalen Wright, whether it had been Marshawn Lloyd. Those guys were there and available for the Dallas Cowboys to select. Didn't do it. We take a situational linebacker that's going to come in, play special teams, and be a rotational piece from day one. That immediately starts to kind of get my blood boiling and getting agitated as we get into the week, as around day 3 of the NFL draft. And then, of course, we saw day 3 wrap up, no running back taken for the Dallas Cowboys. And even the Jets move up in front of the Cowboys and take not one Braylon Allen, but 2 Isaiah Davis, another prospect that I was very high on coming into this process, right out from under the Dallas Cowboys, which leads us into the signing of Ezekiel Elliott. From a fantasy standpoint, volume is king. And from everything this team is telling you right now, they're going to give the ball to Ezekiel Elliott. His 2.7, 3.1 yards per carry, be damned. Ezekiel Elliott is going to get the ball for the Dallas Cowboys quite often in 2024. Whether it be to the detriment of this offense, because of the limitations that he brings, he's become, over the last 2 to 3 years, very, very inefficient in pass blocking, which is going to be a liability on third downs and passing situations. He's going to be out there and he's going to get bowled over by pass rushers getting after Dak Prescott, because let's be honest, Cowboys' offensive line situation was much to be desired last year as well. And now coming into 2024, we did make some improvements through the draft. I think that was one of the key things we needed to do via the draft. Tyler Guyton brought in round 1 to try to set the edge on the left side. Connor Beebe to hopefully play center and try to make up for the absence of Tyler Biotish. But hopefully these guys are going to have to gel, and that's going to be something that we're going to have to watch early on. And if they do not gel, it's going to be a hindrance to the offense as a whole. Dak Prescott's not going to have the time to throw the ball. Ezekiel Elliott or Rico Dowdle, whichever of the two, are not going to have those open spaces to find and get into the secondary level, and have those plus 15-yard runs, stuff that we did not see very much from the Cowboys last year. Only slightly down the stretch of Tony Pollard once he was finally healthy from the broken leg that he sustained the year prior. So that's kind of, it's just, I cannot stress this enough. It's an embarrassment that this is where we are moving into 2024, but I've called it. It's what I saw all along. This team, Jerry Jones, Stephen Jones, are both, from a standpoint of front office and ownership, they are playing a game of chicken with financials when it comes to this team in 2024. You have a lame duck head coach with Mike McCarthy who is not going to get extended. He's going to get fired. Now you have a quarterback that is fighting to even start the conversation of an extension, which they haven't until this point. And now you have CeeDee Lamb, who's unhappy and says he won't show up for workouts because he wants to get an extension too. We put franchise tag on Micah Parsons. That's going to have to be an extension that might have to come as well. And now all of a sudden your 3 top playmakers for the Dallas Cowboys are all looking for money, and not all of them are going to be able to get paid. And so here we are, strapped for cash and not able to improve this team, not even from an NFL standpoint, but from a fantasy standpoint. Honestly, the last 2 to 3 years, the Cowboys, especially with CeeDee Lamb, Tony Pollard has been a big get for a lot of fantasy managers out there. But from a fantasy standpoint, this is going to affect this offense. You're going to see some inconsistencies. You're going to see a lot of forced passes from Dak Prescott in 2024. So I don't think you're going to see the offensive proficiency that we saw from this attack. And it was inconsistent at times, but the year-end numbers proved otherwise. So that's going to be something from a fantasy standpoint, and that's what I focus in on most myself, obviously, as I work with Rotoballer. And a lot of the scouting and a lot of the evaluation that I put in place, it's going to be something to kind of keep in mind on and watch with this team in 2024, because I think things are going to look a lot different with this team in 2025. New head coach is going to come in. There's a potential that Dak Prescott's going to be moved on from, and We're going to have to groom in a new quarterback. It's not going to be Trey Lance, so everybody just chill, calm your pants a little bit. Trey Lance is not going to be the quarterback for the Cowboys in 2025. I will say that right now. I'm adamant about it. So outside of that, moving on into just this egregious signing of Ezekiel Elliott, it's volume is king, like I mentioned at the top. So at this point in time, looking at a lot of the drafts that are going on right now, especially Underdog, Best Ball Millionaire, you're seeing a price tag with Ezekiel Elliott in that round 7, round 8 range at this point in time. Perfectly fine with that from a drafting standpoint. You can bring him in. I think there's a good chance you're going to get him, especially for the 0 running back drafters that are going to be out there, in which there's quite a bit of them in a big format like Best Ball Mania that forego the running back position and kind of land into a guy like Ezekiel Elliott in that round 7, round 8 range, whether he be RB2 or RB3 in your roster build. There's going to be chances there. And I think that's something that they are going to look at from an offensive standpoint with Elliott, as well as the inefficiencies that the team showed in 2023 from the standpoint of getting the ball in the end zone from inside the 5. Ezekiel Elliott wasn't really the best with the Patriots last year from that aspect, but he was good at that with the Cowboys in 2022. So that's something that I think the team's really wanting to get back to, is have that ability to be unpredictable when you're getting into the green zone. Not really putting all the emphasis on Dak Prescott and what he can do to get the ball in the end zone. Try to use Dak Prescott as the play action type of guy to roll out, but have Ezekiel Elliott there as that potential threat to get the ball into the end zone and be a big touchdown vulture, which is where most of his fantasy production is going to have to lie. We saw last year with the Patriots, he did ramp it up from a production standpoint in the reception game, but a lot of that was that dink and dunk that we saw from Mac Jones and from Bailey Zappi. Something that he might not see with the Cowboys in 2024. So you're going to lose that production, but you're going to be expected to see a lot of production built up from the touchdown potential that he might show with this offense. So buy or sell Ezekiel Elliott? That's going to be my question to you guys out there. Jump in the comments there, shoot them in. Are you buying or selling Ezekiel Elliott from a running back standpoint in fantasy in 2024? And then a piggyback on top of that, shoot that into the comment section here as well, and let me know your thoughts also. Dak Prescott, do you see him as a top 5 quarterback in fantasy like he was in 2024? He was in 2023. Do you see that aspect in 2024? I do not personally, but what say you? Shoot that in here to me as well. Let me know what you guys' thoughts are on that. But just kind of wanted to touch on that. If you really want to, some of the other news and notes that have been out there, obviously over the course of the last week, we saw Odell Beckham Jr. sign with the Miami Dolphins. I mentioned that at the time. Not much of a needle mover for me from a fantasy standpoint. Much more of a better NFL move than it was from a fantasy standpoint, because that's a best ball move for me. If you're interested in Odell Beckham Jr. whatsoever from a fantasy standpoint, for me, that's going to be a best ball format only, because the inconsistencies there are going to be wild. We saw last year a lot of that passing offense went through Tyreek Hill. I think that's going to be expected to be somewhat similar this year in 2024. And they still have Jalen Waddle, and he's a major threat when he's on the field too. But as we saw last year, there's plenty of times with a Jalen Waddle that he's on the field, gets banged up, comes off the field. It's not really missing games per se. He's just missing very valuable snaps on the field from getting banged up and kind of getting removed from games. So that's where you saw a lot of that extra usage go Tyreek Hill's way. Now bringing in Odell Beckham Jr., that gives them more of a veteran to fall back on. Cedric Wilson's out the door. That was a guy that was a very coveted signing for them. When they brought him in from the Cowboys, they were high on him. That's why they brought him in. He just did not fit with that offensive system down in Miami. Now you get Odell Beckham Jr. in, a guy that in limited production opportunities with the Ravens was good from time to time, but it's just the fact that offense was not really geared towards getting targets flowed through Odell Beckham Jr., not to mention the emergence of Zay Flowers, their number one draft pick from a year ago as well. So fresh start for Odell Beckham Jr. He's not going to be relied on to be the top 1 or 2 option in this passing game. It's going to be good for him. That way he can just be used situationally. From a fantasy standpoint, that's going to be something, like I said, best ball format only is what I'm interested in with Odell Beckham Jr. So moving on from that, and the other point of what I wanted to kind of get into with this lunchtime podcast, kind of wanted to make it like a sit down and enjoy lunch with the Roto Superstar. So that's what we're kind of doing here today, ladies and gentlemen. I'm off this week, kind of just wanted to come to you guys, talk to you a little bit, just bring you up to speed, thought process as we get into things. Like I mentioned, we've got Underdog Best Ball Mania going on right now. We've got within the next month, Scott Fish Bowl. I'll be live in Nashville for the Scott Fish Bowl draft in Nashville. So if you're planning on attending, come on over to Nashville. Check us out. If you're in the Nashville draft, can't wait to see you guys there. Going to be a blast to draft with you guys. Always an honor when Scott Fish puts myself in this draft every single year. Obviously, I've been a big part of the hosting duties for the Atlanta draft the last 2 years with my co-host Nick Heffley at Real FF Goat, at the Real FF Goat. If you're not following him on X as well, go give that its follow. But looking forward to this Nashville draft. Scott Fish Bowl. We haven't seen the scoring system come down yet. That's usually the big point of excitement for a lot of people once the scoring system is announced, to kind of see how things look. Last year obviously there were no negative points for anything, so I'm gonna be really interested to see the wrinkles that Scott Fish and crew put into what the Fish Bowl is going to be this year in 2024 from a scoring aspect. So that's kind of next to what's on the docket. But really, what we kind of wanted to get in here and talk about, wanted to kind of look at and review a little bit of this rookie ADP through sleeper as rookie dynasty drafts have kind of gotten underway over the last week. Obviously, we talked about it a little bit on our pre-draft coverage that I did prior to night one of the draft. Myself and Nick Heffley discussed a lot of these pieces, the players, what we thought about their potential would be based on landing spots before knowing their landing spots in the draft. So after the draft, from a one quarterback draft league system, this is what I'm looking at in terms of scoring. Really nothing has changed when you look at the top 4. It's still coming off the board. It's Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, Rome Odunze, Brock Bowers at 4. And obviously, when you look at it, there's question marks with both, or really the 3 guys from 2, 3, and 4. We were talking about that when it comes to the landing spot. Malik Neighbors, you have that question mark now with Daniel Jones and that Giants offense. But if you want to look at it from a positive spin, the targets are going to be coming his way hot and heavy in 2024. Rome Odunze, obviously there's a little bit of a groan when he lands there because the team, they've got DJ Moore there, they've got Keenan Allen who's been brought in, but if you're looking at it from a dynasty standpoint, this is going to be a guy that's going to take over. I think he has every opportunity to be the wide receiver 1 with Caleb Williams as that offense grows down the next 2 to 3 years. Keenan Allen obviously is going to be moved on from over the course of the next year. So that's going to be a good spot with him. But really, that Brock Bowers landing spot with the Las Vegas Raiders was the biggest question mark of the draft. We didn't see that was a need for the team. They just invested draft capital with Michael Meyer a year ago. Now you bring in Brock Bowers. And obviously, we're probably looking at a situation where the Raiders offense is going to employ a lot more 12 personnel. You're going to have Meyer as more of that inline blocker type. And then you're going to see Brock Bowers kind of employed similar to what we saw Dalton Kincaid in the Bills last year. Kind of more split out, slot type of guy to try to find soft spots in the zones, try to present more of a catchable target for whether it be Aiden O'Connell, whether it be Gardner Minshew, what have you. So that's been unaffected when you look at the top 4 in terms of dynasty value with these rookies currently. But after that, you get into a lot of the movement when it comes to how these players are kind of unfolding. You outside of that, Xavier Worthy, Brian Thomas Jr. are the next 2 wide receivers coming off the board. We kind of see that as what was going to be the case, just based on skill set alone, not with landing spot coming to mind. But one big mover post draft has been Jonathan Brooks, in the landing spot with the Carolina Panthers. Comes in, draft capital, round 2 draft capital. You like to see that because you know the team is kind of investing in him. So now the team is also, since yesterday, they brought in Rashad Penny as well, which was questionable. Well, we kind of wonder what that move was and why that was brought about. So now you have Jonathan Brooks coming in off the ACL injury. The surgery was done. All indications are is he's going to be good to go come week 1. We'll see how training camp is, how he looks, and whether or not he's going to participate in that. So that's going to be a question mark to look at there. So Jonathan Brooks, from a standpoint of running back potential with the Panthers, I like it. He's going to be the RB1 there. He's going to be the bell cow in that offense once he's fully healthy and ready to go. But as we've talked about for a long time now, is how this offense is going to look with Bryce Young. Is there going to be a second-year progression at quarterback? You know, the new head coach, David Canales, coming over from Tampa. He's done great work with quarterbacks in the past. Baker Mayfield, especially last year, looked great. But now you've got a potential for the running back, and he has spoke about Jonathan Brooks ad nauseum. Glowing reports for Jonathan Brooks from David Canales. So there's a chance that even year 1, we see Jonathan Brooks utilized similar to how Rachaad White was utilized with the Buccaneers last year. Very heavily used in the passing game, a lot of work if he can hold up to it. I could see a low-end RB1 finish for Jonathan Brooks as early as 2024 based on the usage alone. Like I mentioned a few minutes ago with Ezekiel Elliott, workload is king, and that's something that we're going to be looking at with Jonathan Brooks. Is that workload going to come as soon as his rookie season in 2024? Case in point, last year, Breece Hall, coming back from the ACL injury. Maybe he didn't look the best from a running game standpoint right out of the gate, but he was also utilized from a passing game standpoint, and that's really what buoyed his fantasy production throughout most of 2024. So that's going to be something that we want to look at with Jonathan Brooks moving forward. I like him. I've currently got him at RB2 in my dynasty rankings, though, and that's going to be only behind Trey Benson, who is a guy who has snuck into round 1 consideration with his landing spot at 12th overall when I'm looking at ADP right now, and he's the number 2 running back with the Arizona Cardinals. Odds are James Conner's going to be gone after 2024. He's going to be an unrestricted free agent, so that's going to be something to look at there. And then moving on past that, Trey Benson is he's got all the skill sets that you want to have with a running back that you potentially see as a bell cow option. That's why I've got him personally as my RB1 still currently in my rookie rankings. I think there's a potential for Trey Benson to really fit into this backfield. He's gonna be a complement to James Conner early in 2024, so there's going to be some utilization there, even in his rookie season. But I think there's going to be a chance that 2025 we're going to be talking about a guy that's probably going to be ranked as an RB1 in fantasy drafts next year if he ascends into the RB1 role for the Cardinals and they don't bring any other opposition in to kind of compete with him next year, just bringing in kind of ancillary bits and pieces to kind of be complementary backs to what he is. So that's what we're looking at from the standpoint from the 2 running backs that have really been adjusted from a fantasy standpoint. But outside of that, you're looking at rounding out round one, you've got your usual names. Ladd McConkey landing with the Chargers. You've got Keon Coleman landing with the Buffalo Bills. Those are two guys that a lot are going to be expected early on, just from a target standpoint alone. Ladd McConkey, we've talked about him previous podcasts. You've seen me write about him with Rotoballer. There's a chance that he's going to come in right away with the Chargers and be that number one option in the passing game for the Chargers. I think he's definitely going to be a building block for some dynasty managers out there. He's obviously a round one prospect you want to draft. So if you're in a mode where you're needing wide receiver help now and to build moving forward, Ladd McConkey is your guy. So is Keon Coleman. You're not having to pay the price that you're having to pay with the other guys up the board, Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, Roma Dunze. These guys are coming at more of a cost for managers further down the board. Keon Coleman, if you're watching on X and watching Twitter, whatever, all the stuff with Keon Coleman, the guy is an absolute just nut job. Hilarious, some of the funniest things you'll see out there. And I like that from a personality standpoint coming into the team. He's not taking himself too seriously, and I think he's going to fit in really, really well from the jump with Josh Allen, as opposed to that very tumultuous relationship that they're coming off of with Stephon Diggs. I think you're going to see Keon Coleman fit in very nicely right out of the gate with Josh Allen in this offense. And he's definitely a guy that's moved up my board post-draft. I've got him up to wide receiver 6 in my rookie rankings right now over rotoballer.com. I think there's a potential for a solid season, probably in that more low-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3 range from a redraft perspective. But from a dynasty perspective, you're obviously looking at a guy that you could probably get low-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3 now, but he's going to progress quickly into being in a discussion as a high-end wide receiver 2 with that offense. Just being tied into Josh Allen alone is going to be something that's going to get his production potential up in a value for dynasty managers out there. So that's kind of how you're looking at things with the first round and how things are shaking out there. The other big mover post-draft, obviously, is going to be Xavier Leggett, staying with Carolina Panthers with Jonathan Brooks. A lot has been talked about him because the team did use a very high draft capital to select him in the NFL draft. I don't agree with it. He's coming in, and he's of the similar build, kind of the same skill set that they just brought in with Jonathan Mingo a year ago. And we saw Jonathan Mingo didn't really work out this past season. Obviously, a lot of fantasy managers out there are hoping that we're going to see kind of a progression up what we saw with DK Metcalf coming into the league. A lot of people are questioning Metcalf and his measurables and the testing aspect at the combine and what we saw with him during that lead up to the NFL draft. Some people were turned off by that. I think a lot of people were turned off by what they saw on game film with Leggett. He's obviously kind of that late year breakout. He popped his final year in college with Shane Rattler just a year ago, or Spencer Rattler. And so there's some questions that a lot of people are going to have with him, whether he's that one-year wonder or if he's a guy that's popping late athleticism-wise. But for me, I don't like the landing spot. I think there's too many question marks when it comes to Leggett in this landing spot with the Carolina Panthers. I just don't think that offensive stability is going to be there early on. So for me, as he's gotten into high round 2 ADP that we're looking at right now, he's looking at overall 14 on Sleeper. That's too rich for my blood, and I will be passing on him each and every time. So I'll pose this question out there as well, too. So what say you out there in Woo Nation? Xavier Leggett, is he a high round 2 prospect for you in dynasty drafts as things stand currently right now, May 7th? Let me know what you think out there. Shoot those comments in to me as well. So you might be asking yourself, and I'll kind of get into what you might – where's the ADP for the quarterbacks, the top 4 quarterbacks? Well, those have really been unaffected when you look at that from how they ranked kind of going in. Not for me per se, but from a consensus standpoint. Caleb Williams still is the top prospect. He is overall number 5 currently. And then you go into Jaden Daniels, overall 10. He's the QB2. And then going into, you've got Drake May, overall 16, QB3. And then you have J.J. McCarthy at overall 18, QB4. And that's where I have a little bit of a difference with my rankings as opposed to how they're shaping up in consensus right now. I have J.J. McCarthy over Drake May. I do have Jaden Daniels over Caleb Williams still. Go back to our pre-draft podcast, pull that up, and you can kind of hear my thoughts on that. Really, nothing's changed based on these landing spots because all of them landed exactly where I had them landing prior to the draft. So if you want to kind of hear my thoughts on those, what I think about them, and how they project into the NFL over the next few years, go pull up our previous podcast, and you can check that out as well. So getting into other risers in this draft, a big riser that we're seeing right now, we've got obviously over the course of the last few days, and I did want to touch on this name because he is my guy, and we go back months, and that is Malachi Corley. My guy, Malachi Corley. I've been the conductor of the hype train for Malachi Corley for a number of months now. Lands at you might want to call it a questionable spot with the Jets, but we've heard nothing but praise from this coaching staff over the last few days as they've gotten into rookie camps. And even Aaron Rodgers offering him to stay in his guest house. That's a good indication. I think this is going to wind up being a blend of perfect marriage of skill set for what this team needs. And that's, for me, is the biggest thing with Malachi Corley. Coming into this situation, they need a guy that can play all levels of the field. They need a guy that can break tackles, create yards after contact, and that is the forte, what Malachi Corley does best. When we talked about it previously, I've talked about it on X as well. Mike Williams brought in via free agency doesn't move the needle for me when it comes to Malachi Corley and his position on this depth chart. I think he's going to quickly become that slot option for this team. And if Nathaniel Hackett has any wits about him whatsoever, he will utilize Malachi Corley in creative ways, jet sweeps, get the ball to him on slants, get the ball to him on quick screens. Just let him create in the open field because that is what he does the best. And everything you're hearing from this coaching staff is they want to get him the ball, get him the ball, get him the ball, get him the ball. And if they follow through with that, then you have a guy that can be not to the extent of what we saw from a production standpoint in that record-breaking year from Puka Nacua last year in 2023, but he's a guy that can give you a lot of production that you're not paying a hefty premium for. Because if you look right now, he's overall 25. That's top end round 3. Solidly a guy that I think should be going in round 2. You're getting a premium on him right now. And if you're doing rookie drafts right now, get him while you can at that price because it's only going to increase and he's only going to come up the board. I have very lofty praise for Malachi Corley. Another guy that's getting lofty praise over the course of the last few days, Marshawn Lloyd. Another guy that we have talked about ad nauseum, a guy that I've shared very lofty praise with my guy at Debro that works for Fantasy Pros. So if you haven't checked out their podcast, they do a great podcast at Dynasty Pros. So go look that up on all your podcast formats. He has been a big proponent of Marshawn Lloyd, had him ranked as his number 1 running back coming into the draft. And as things stand right now, I have Marshawn Lloyd, although I've got him at my RB4. I think that's probably room for movement because the way I'm looking at it right now, outside of I have Trey Benson at RB1. After that, I've got Brooks, Jalen Wright, Marshawn Lloyd. I think a lot of those guys, those 3 names are going to be very interchangeable over the course of the next couple of months. Some give and take, some movement that will be done with these rankings. Lofty praise. Like I said, Green Bay Packers have been very, very high on him. It already seems from what you want to hear if you're reading between the lines is that they've likened him to Aaron Jones, which is now that position, that player, and that skill set that is no longer on the roster. He is gone, moved on to the Minnesota Vikings. They bring in Josh Jacobs, who's really viewed as, that bell cow type of a back, but is more utilized from a standpoint of from his running ability. Now you're going to have a Marshawn Lloyd who's going to really oust A.J. Dillon out of this rotation. A.J. Dillon might wind up being a cut in this backfield potentially, and Marshawn Lloyd's going to fill that Aaron Jones role. Going to be very, very heavily utilized in the passing game. So that's going to be something to keep an eye on from especially PPR standpoints early on in the season, is how he's rolled out, how he's utilized creatively in this backfield. I think you're going to see Marshawn Lloyd on the field quite often. And with his current ADP as well, you're looking at him at overall 23 in rookie drafts at this moment. Tail end round 2, I think that's going to be another player you're going to see move up the board a little bit. He's behind Jalen Wright, who's at 22 overall right now. I think you're going to see a lot of this with those two players back and forth, but as they both move up the board, because I think that they both should be taken ahead of both a Troy Franklin, who's at 19, and Roman Wilson, who is at 20. You've got Blake Corum, who's at 17. I think that is a mistake at this point in time. I think both of these two running backs, whether it be Jalen Wright or Marshawn Lloyd, I think should be drafted ahead of Blake Corum, who obviously lands with the Rams. We've heard some glowing reports coming out of camp early on there with Blake Corum and how he's really a carbon copy of Kyren Williams. That's going to be something to kind of keep an eye on, how they're utilized. Blake Corum, I don't think, sees more than 35 to 38% of the usage early on in the season. But if Kyren Williams were to get hurt, comes off the field, then there might be a situation where you see Blake Corum really kind of take hold of that backfield later on in the year. So he's the gamble for me as far as a backfield, as a running back prospect when it comes to fantasy and dynasty in particular at this point in time. Outside of that, if you kind of get further down into the board, you really, once you're getting into the third, fourth, fifth rounds of these dynasty rookie drafts, especially early on, you really were wanting to find those nuggets, those diamonds in the rough, like we found with a Puka Nacua last year. So if you're following me last year, I gave you Puka Nacua last year, and I also gave you Sam Laporta last year. Those were guys that I felt were great buying opportunities early on in the process, and then the next thing you know it, they've become all expensive as hell to try to acquire, especially from a dynasty standpoint. So if you're kind of looking at it from a standpoint of you're wanting to try to find some of the diamonds in the rough, obviously Ben Sinnott, if you want to stay with this, the Sam Laporta mindset, who's that next best tight end that's going to come in? I've got two options for you. Ben Sinnott falls into an excellent position early on with Washington Commanders to be able to fill in that tight end role that has been left there for a number of years. It comes in immediately. I think they're going to utilize him early on, not from a touchdown potential that we saw with Sam Laporta last year, but I think there's a chance to really acquire and earn targets early on in that receiving core with the Washington Commanders. But then also Eric All. I mentioned that as soon as he was drafted to the Cincinnati Bengals. I think there's a chance for him to fill in a much-needed role as a pass-catching tight end with that Bengals offense to cover the more middle of the field and be a safety blanket for Joe Burrow moving forward. If he can stay healthy, that's the thing with Eric All. If he stays healthy and stays on the field, I think he is another guy coming from the tight end factory that is Iowa. He's a guy that that's going to come in right away and be a guy that you can get essentially for free in rookie drafts right now. And even in Dynasty, you probably can acquire him for nothing at all. Take a stab at him at those late rounds in your underdog drafts. Take a stab at a guy like Eric All. I think he's going to pay off as the season goes along. Those are two guys that I'm looking at from a tight end standpoint. But outside of that, staying with the Commanders, I think Luke McCaffrey has a chance to really kind of come in and from a package standpoint, really find a niche early on, but he more is going to be a guy that's going to progress out further on, 2025, 2026. If they move on from a Terry McLaurin, if they move on from a Jahan Dotson, is Luke McCaffrey going to be a guy that can kind of really fill that role of what they wanted Curtis Samuel to be? So that's something to kind of look at there. Obviously, I can't do a podcast. I can't go any further without talking about my guy, Kamani Vidal. Kamani Vidal, you're starting to hear the rumblings. He's another guy that I've really pushed the hype train on over the last couple of months, going back even to the Senior Bowl. You're starting to hear those rumblings. John Hanson's talked about him on that morning show on Sirius XM. He comes in to the Los Angeles Chargers, who they brought in Gus Edwards and the shell of J.K. Dobbins coming off that ACL or the Achilles injury a year ago. He's really fit similarly to a Blake Corum, who Jim Harbaugh has a lot of history with back to the University of Michigan. I think once Harbaugh gets his hands on a guy like Kamani Vidal, who is built small in stature, but is thick and fast and creates in open space, really big from a missed tackles force standpoint and at the college level. I think you're going to get him in with his rookie camp, get him in training camp, and they're going to see what he can do on the field. And you're going to see him progressively throughout the season really kind of make his mark in this backfield. And he's essentially going to wind up being on the field for third downs. He's going to be the pass catching back, I believe, for this Chargers offense. And let's be honest, they need pass catching targets in this offense after losing Mike Williams, after losing Keenan Allen. And now they're going to need some guys to catch passes in this, whether it be in the backfield with Kamani Vidal, whether it be Loud McConkey on the outside. There's going to be opportunities there. Now, you want to argue the Greg Roman offense and the Jim Harbaugh offense, that the fact that they're just not going to throw a ton, obviously that's going to be the case. But all those targets are going to be there for them to earn and acquire. And you cannot just simply not use Justin Herbert from a fantasy standpoint. He's not going to be a QB1 this year, but we've seen the pedigree. We know the skill set. Herbert's going to do what he can to get the ball out to a Loud McConkey and to utilize a guy that has that skill set like a Kamani Vidal. Definite diamond in the rough for me when you look at him from a fantasy standpoint. And then outside of that, looking at a couple of these other landing spots through the NFL draft that we kind of come across, Ray Davis is one that was talked about as a potential complementary piece coming in for James Cook, be able to spell him from time to time. I do like that. He's a guy that you can get very, very easily in rookie drafts right now, overall 40. So you're getting him in around 4. You're not really paying a big price to get him. Theo Johnson, getting back to the tight end well, comes in, can really make a mark early on with the Giants now that potentially Darren Waller's going to be retired. They have that Daniel Bellinger is still there, but he's more of an inline type of guy. So I think Theo Johnson can kind of come in and take over that role as the tight end for the New York Giants moving forward. And then kind of as you get further along into in a lot of these landing spots further down the board, there's really not too many spots. You might want to argue kind of Kendall Milton with the Eagles, who could potentially kind of make a spot for him on the depth chart. He'll be a special teamer guy if he can make the team out of camp. But outside of that, there's going to be few and far between opportunities back behind Saquon Barkley and Kenneth Gainwell. But I think a guy like Milton has a little bit of that pedigree if he can make the team and go into 2024 and beyond. He's definitely a guy that you could probably put on your roster further down the board. Isaac Guerrero with the 49ers, I've talked glowingly about too. I think he's a guy that you can bring in late in drafts, put him on towards the end of your bench, roster stash him, see how things play out in 2024, because I think he's going to be the RB2 on that offense in 2025, back behind Christian McCaffrey. And let's be honest, that's the spot you want to be in because there's a potential to really, really produce if McCaffrey were to miss time. And then getting outside of that, last guy I'll touch on before we wrap the lunchtime podcast up with Roto Superstar, is Ryan Flournoy. He is what I've called a unicorn prospect. Very, very nice athletic scores. Look great coming in through the testing process. Things look great at the combine. He's really flashed throughout this entire process. He goes drafted late to the Dallas Cowboys, who obviously you see behind me, and we talked about extensively earlier. Ryan Flournoy, I think, is a guy you should be taking as your last pick in your dynasty rookie drafts. I wrote about him in my Rotoballer piece leading into the draft. I think if there's a chance that you could find this year's Puka Nacua, Ryan Flournoy is a guy that could be that guy. And again, going back to the Malachi Corley point, I'm not saying Ryan Flournoy is going to put up best all-time rookie numbers ever out of the gate, but I think he's a guy that you can bring in, roster stash him, because things are going to change wildly after 2024 in Dallas. He could overtake Jalen Tolbert as the wide receiver 3 in this offense as early as this year. There's a good chance that he could be the wide receiver 2 in this offense in 2025 once the team moves on from Brandon Cooks. So there's an opportunity, a very good buying opportunity with a Ryan Flournoy, who you're not paying any cost to acquire in rookie drafts right now. I think that's a chance that you can bring him in, put him at the end of your bench, and see how things play out, because from a skill set standpoint, height, weight, speed, he has all the makings of a guy that can really ascend into a solid wide receiver 2 in an offense. And if it's an up-tempo type of an offense that the Cowboys have been over the last couple of years, there's a good chance that he's going to be a fantasy producer for you from a wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 standpoint eventually down the road, if things lead into where he is the wide receiver 2 and things kind of come his way and they can build with a talent like that. So Ryan Flournoy, remember that name. I think that's going to be a guy that we're going to talk about months down the road from now. So outside of that, no questions in on the board right now. Like I mentioned, go to the YouTube page, Woo Fantasy YouTube page. Send me those comments. Give us a like. Help me out. Share this with everybody. I need to build these subscribers up, because the more subscribers I get, the more you guys want to interact with me, the more I'm going to keep doing stuff like this with you guys, coming on here when I can, and we'll talk about fantasy. Obviously, we're going to go, and we need you to go follow the @woo_ page on X as well. And of course, as always, go and follow my stuff on Rotoballer, where you can find all of my written content. Former FSWA award winner here, just nominated last year as well for best ongoing series. So find all my written content over at Rotoballer. And outside of that, I am Roto Superstar. Follow me on X. And until next time, guys, this has been a blast. I'm glad I could come on here and do this with you guys today. But follow me again in another episode of Woo Fantasy right here on Rotoballer. And we will see you guys later. Peace. Woo!